All right, yeah, let's get started. So I'm talking today, Joy, and welcome to my channel. Talking today about all the crazy mistakes I hope folks can avoid on their college applications. So y'all know about my background. I've read college applications for the University of Washington for about 3 years now, and I'm moving on to read applications for UC San Diego this year. So I'm kind of broadening my experience with the type of applications I've read. And through that time, I've read thousands and thousands of personal statements, literally thousands of personal statements. The main essays, short essays, and then while I was going to school at UW and reading, I was also a writing tutor. So a lot of my students there who would come in, grad students, med students, PhD students, engineering students, undergrads, freshmen, whether it was they were working on a research project, an English essay. I also did have a lot of students coming in for personal statements for their major, personal statements for to get into grad school, personal statements for PhD programs, dissertations. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going to come from with my experience, and then I just like helping students. So I'm gonna tell y'all exactly kind of what to avoid in your personal statements, and then if folks in the chat have questions, yeah, I can answer those questions if they pop up. But I'm going to try to keep this one kind of short. I've been going 5 minutes, get everything set up. Hopefully next time it goes a little bit more smoothly. But if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you know when I go live. You know when I post new videos. Hit the like button. YouTube, that helps YouTube a lot. Get the video out there so more folks can join the chat. More folks can join the live stream. More folks can find the channel. And the more folks I got here engaging, interacting, the more time I spend on here answering questions. So, yeah, hopefully we can get some more people here. And let me see. Let me do one more thing, maybe. Let me see if I can get some more folks. So, yeah, so while I'm just figuring this out, the first thing I'll go over with admissions essays that I like, fix this camera, that I really see quite a bit, and it's just from the start. Actually, I'll start here. The first thing I'll say to avoid doing your college admissions essay, I've even been reading a few essays for students who just need to look over before early action deadline, and you gotta answer the prompt. I've read already multiple essays for early action applications where the question might be describe why you are applying to MIT, for instance. And the student or the applicant will go on and talk about why they decided to play football or how they got interested in science. And I'm like, I kind of get how that could be related, but you're really not answering the prompt. Especially if you only have like 100 words or 200 words. They're asking that question for a reason. They're not asking you why you chose MIT or Cornell or LSU because they want to see how you write. Well, they do want to see how you write, but they're not asking solely to know if you're a good writer or not. They're asking because they want to understand your interest in the school. So if you go off on some tangent about you like to you're interested in STEM or used to play the piano or I grew up in an all-white neighborhood. That's not really answering the prompt. Good essay content, but not necessarily answering the prompt. So that's probably my first thing. So some of the biggest mistakes I've seen. It's just like an immediate turn off because I'm like, wow, is this a recycled essay? Did they even actually read the prompt? And so it's not the worst because you still do have, as an admissions reader, I still do have content to see and use. But it's just like, just answer the question. You know, it's really that simple. Just answer the question. And it'll save yourself a lot of trouble. So the next thing I will say, number 2 on my list, and one of the first things I see when I'm reading an essay for applications for during admission season is just like using a quote that is either irrelevant or just kind of stuffed in there just to have some sort of unique opening for your essay, but doesn't really fit. I remember for folks out here, I was on a Reddit one time and this kid asked, you know, I want to quote Elon Musk here, and it's he uses a swear word. Should I use it? And I was like, no, not only should you not use that Elon Musk quote because it has a swear word in it and it's not something that you need in a personal statement. Just avoid cursing if possible. It's not necessary. But the Elon Musk quote had nothing to do with the personal statement, the content of the essay, the prompt, anything. So it was just trying to be maybe provocative for provocative sake or interesting for interesting sake. But it kind of fell flat. So I would say if you're looking for an interesting opening, you're much better off coming up with a quote or a narrative or a story or an experience from your own life rather than using one from a celebrity or other famous person. So that's number 2. Another thing I've been seeing a lot this year, and I see a lot every year, and every time I read it, I'm like, it just never comes off well. Never comes off well. For the one, as admissions officers, readers, we don't expect teenagers to have all the insights in the world, but we do expect them to be mature and to understand that a lot of the issues that we face in society aren't necessarily the fault of the individual. It's kind of that deficit mindset I'm thinking. So if I'm reading a personal statement from an undergrad student and they start off by saying, the world sucks and my peers are uninformed and all they do is listen to music and go hang out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, and I'm the only one in my school who's really trying to change the world. Great that you're trying to change the world. That is really something to be excited about and really commendable. But the part about that, everything I just said, that is a turnoff and kind of shows a little bit of immaturity is blaming the world's ills on your peers. Just because they're teenagers just like you, they're trying to navigate the world just like you, and that kind of diss or bad sentiment coming from another teenager just never comes off good. It's overly critical. Again, it places blame on your classmates, students, peers, other teenagers, when really, if there's something wrong with the world, it's most likely the fault of adults, to put it simply. So I would say just avoid that. If you're going to talk about being a positive influence, wanting to change your community, I think you need to look at it in a way that how do I bring my peers on? How do I bring my community into this fight that I'm passionate about, instead of, spending 200 words talking about how they're not as motivated as you. It just doesn't come off right. Let me just type in here for folks who have questions. If you have admissions questions, I can answer quickly. Okay, so that's bashing your own peers. I talked about using quotes, talked about not answering the prompt. So the next thing I would talk about to avoid, again, this pops up a lot, I wouldn't have it on my list if it didn't pop up a lot, is I call it whining or complaining in your essay about an insignificant event that impacted your grades. That isn't to say if you've had a major illness, tragedy in the family, moved 5 times during high school, had to evacuate because of a national emergency. Those are all legit, understandable reasons to have your grades impacted, to have maybe not as high a GPA as in previous semesters, or why you may have had a break in class. When I say legit, I don't mean to say that any reason is legitimate, but it's more so, it's like, what do you want to spend space in your personal statement? The 600 words you get, how much space do you want to spend complaining about that teacher you didn't like and talking about how they gave you a bad grade because they didn't like you either? Or that, you have bad grades because you needed to practice for the tennis tournament coming up. Those, of course, are legitimate, are life things that happen in life. My teacher didn't like me because I didn't really agree with their take on the historical context of an event. Perfectly fine. Not everyone's going to agree. Or, you're passionate about the extracurricular activities you do, and so you're GPA suffers a little bit. Perfectly fine. Just don't whine about it in your personal essay. Those are things that happen, and just because you don't have a perfect 4.0 doesn't mean that an admission officer wants to read about how, you miss school because I don't know. There's not many bad reasons, but they do come up every once in a while. So if it's not something that had a really big impact, an illness, injury, tragedy, move, if it's none of those things, I would just kind of avoid mentioning it, really, because I think it can come off as sort of whiny, if I'm being honest. Trying to fix my hat here. Okay, so the next thing I would say, winding down here, talk about the problem. It's hard to. The next thing I'll talk about is it's hard to write about diversity, but it is definitely possible. So that's the next thing I see that people kind of falter on is trying to reduce diversity down to your friend group. Like, oh, I have Asian friends, and I have black friends, and I have white friends, and I have indigenous friends and native friends. Great and well. I'll say it again, great and well, but it's not what admission staff, it's not what colleges are necessarily seeking when they ask you to talk about how you will have a positive impact on the inclusive, safe, and diverse environments that most colleges try to be. It's not enough to talk about how you like Mexican food either, or Asian food. And again, I would not be bringing these things up if I didn't see it often in personal essays. So if all you can think of is I like diversity or I promote equity because I don't discriminate and I have all these different types of people in my friend group, you gotta go much deeper. Of course, that's a legitimate thing to write about in an essay. But when we're talking about the top students, the students who are reflective and introspective and understand the nuance of how the world works and socioeconomic factors that impact equity, and how diversity is not something that has been a positive term, had a positive connotation forever, especially in America. So if you are going to talk about diversity, I think you have to really go deep, go beyond what's on your dinner table, go beyond who your friends are, and talk about like what type of equity, how do your goals work to promote equity in the world. So if you're going to be a doctor, I use this example often, you're going to go to med school. As a doctor, do you understand that a good portion of the population, not only in the United States but in the world, can't afford adequate health care? And how as a doctor are you going to address that lack of equity? That's the kind of stuff that we're looking for you to talk about, even at the undergrad level. And then, or even more personally, how has my individual identity impacted how I move through the world, what my goals are, what college I want to go to, as a mixed race person or as a native person? How are the values that my community has instilled in me? How are the values that I was raised with as a member of this community, as a member of this diverse community, impacted everything that I want to be? That's also very commendable content to write about. And then I think another one I kind of alluded to that a bit is like what impact has my culture had in my choice to attend college, and not just like your race or your ethnicity, but are you your socioeconomic identity? Are you a first generation student? Are you a low income student? All those types of factors speak to diversity. They speak to inclusion, especially since colleges have in the past been a means for the elite or the wealthy to pass on their wealth and to gain more wealth, and not necessarily been open to folks from working class or poor communities. So that's legitimate. And then I think another thing you could talk about when it's asking you about diversity, like write about diversity. So the prompt, a question I see a lot that I think is pretty powerful to discuss is what can you bring to campus that'll create an inclusive learning environment? So it can be something as tangible as creating a program, a workshop, a club that promotes equity and diversity and inclusion, whether that's a cultural affiliation club, so Latin club, Asian club, black American club, what have you, or creating a program where you're taking your cohort of peers who are in medical school out into the community and hosting clinics on preventive health care for folks who can't otherwise come into the clinic because of barriers like transportation or working or money. So those are the types of things that I think help applicants talk about a diversity in a real and meaningful way. Talk about diversity beyond their multicultural friend group. Again, not dissing that, just saying that we just look for a little bit more. We look for to separate students. That's kind of how we separate them is, what are you bringing to the table? How do you really understand diversity in this world? Do you really understand inclusion and equity, or are you still at the point where you don't see a need for diversity and you don't really understand why social equity in a learning environment is important for both minority groups, black, brown, but also important for dominant groups to also understand. So those are kind of my things that I would majorly avoid in any admissions essay. So let me look and see what else I have here. Some other things. Put your most important. Be engaging from the get-go. I read sometimes dozens, if not 100 plus applications a day sometimes, which means reading 200 to 300 essays, because Common App, Coalition App, they usually have 2 to 3 apiece. So be interesting, be engaging, and I think the essays that I find most interesting and engaging and really want to make me bring the student in and meet them and have them be a part of my community are those essays that share a personal narrative. Like, what has brought you to this point? What concrete experiences have you had that have shaped who you are as a person to this date? I think those are powerful narratives. The more visual you can be, the more sensory cues you can use, the more engaging you can keep the reader. That all helps you in the long run, because if I'm engaged in your story, if I want to know who you are as a person, if I want to meet you, then I want to have you at the school, and that means you get an A+ for your essay. It's kind of that simple. So I think some of the things I've seen take me out of essays is passive language. That's kind of a common critique in essays, but it's common because it's powerful. When you're using active, engaging language like I will, I am, instead of I want to be, or hopefully in the future, that's a very different type of language. Be active, be passionate, be aggressive is what I would often tell students that I would help with different writing assignments. Is you have to own what you're saying. And if you don't own it, if I don't believe you as a reader, then it's hard for me to say that what you're saying is real. If I don't believe it, it's less real for me. So be as real as possible. Be as aggressive as possible. Keep the reader engaged. Own what you're saying. So yeah, that's kind of one of the other things I have is don't give me that weak sauce. Own it. Make me feel what you're feeling. I think it helps you in the long run. I'd also say if you're describing an initiative that you worked on, a website that you started, a publication, include the link. It helps me personally put your accomplishments into context, and that's really helpful when I'm thinking about, they say they have 100,000 followers on Instagram, and they're using that kind of following to promote these different equity initiatives. I want to go to your Instagram and see exactly what you're doing, because not only is that exciting, but it really helps me put into context just what your achievements are. And I think that's really powerful to be able to do. Plus, it breaks up kind of the monotony of reading a bunch of applications. If I can switch off for a second and go check out a cool website, or check out your business, or check out what you're doing online, that's really fun. And again, the more real you are to me, the more real you are to admissions officers, the more we see you as a person who can be sitting at a seat at our college. We need, I want to physically, you want me to envision you in that seat, because once I envision you in that seat, it's hard for me to erase that image and say, oh, they're not a good fit. So that's kind of what I have for today. Not seeing many questions in the chat box, but that's okay. We can get some more questions next time. So, but if you do have a question about what I've talked about, leave a comment. I love giving these admissions essay tips. Again, I've read thousands of personal statements, thousands of personal essays, and I've kind of started to see what works and what doesn't work. And so hopefully if you have more questions, comments about what I've talked about today, leave them below. Leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and then I will talk to you next time. That's what I got for now. All right. Let me get up out of here. All right, thanks, y'all. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.